All right, welcome. Today, we are diving deep into a book called Time for a Turning Point by Charlie Kirk. Now, this book lays out what it sees as a major choice for America's future. It's basically a fork in the road, right? One path is all about free markets and a smaller government. The other path, well, the book argues we're already kind of heading down that one. And it's presented as a sort of roadmap for change, with a real focus on younger generations.
So, to really get a handle on the argument here, we're going to break it down into 5 main parts. First up, the call to action, why this is so urgent. Then we'll meet 2 characters, Julia and Julio, who are meant to represent 2 totally different visions for the country. After that, we'll look at the book's diagnosis of the problem, what it thinks the cure is, and finally, the game plan for making it all happen.
Okay, so first things first, why write this book in the first place? Well, right from the get-go, it kicks off with this huge sense of urgency. The message is framed as something way bigger than just a political debate. It's positioned as, a critical fight for the future of the country. And this quote is used to really set the stakes high, right? The argument being made is that America's founding principles are in trouble, and just sitting on the sidelines is not an option. This whole idea of a fight to bring back what the author calls first principles, that really becomes the engine driving the entire book. And this is a really key point the author makes. The book isn't just about pointing out problems. It's trying to be a roadmap, a guide. The whole goal is to lay out a path back to free markets and a smaller government. And the strategy for how to get there? Well, it all hinges on getting young people on board to lead the charge. So, how do you make a big vision like that feel, well, real? The author does it with a central story. It's basically a metaphor about 2 people, Julia and Julio, and their lives are meant to show 2 completely different versions of America. First up is Julia. Now, this character was actually borrowed from a White House infographic back in 2012. In the book's version of her story, Julia's life is this journey that's propped up by different government programs. Pretty much every major life event, we're talking education, healthcare, even starting a business, is helped along or made possible by some kind of government program. And here's where you really see the contrast laid out. In the book's telling, you have Julia, who graduates with a bunch of student debt from a system that's all backed by federal loans. Her first job is influenced by healthcare mandates like covering birth control. But then you have Julio. He represents the free market path. He uses school vouchers, so he graduates with no debt, and he steps into a job market where any company, big or small, can offer him things like an internship or tuition assistance. And the comparison keeps going, really trying to drive home this deep philosophical divide. The book shows Julia needing a government loan to get her business off the ground, all while dealing with the rules of Obamacare. Julio's path? Well, that's framed as being all about self-reliance. He saves up his own cash, gets a loan from a local community bank, and handles his healthcare costs with a medical savings account in what's described as a much more competitive, transparent market. So after laying out these 2 stories, the book basically turns to the reader and asks this really direct question. It's a challenge, right? It's asking you to choose between these 2 worlds, Julia's with its government safety nets, or Julio's with its market-driven opportunities. And that very choice is what sets up the next part, the book's diagnosis of what it thinks went wrong to create Julia's world in the first place. All right, so what exactly is the problem here? What, according to the book, leads to Julia's world? Well, the diagnosis is pretty straightforward: big government. The argument goes after its size, its spending, its rules and regulations, blaming them as the root cause of the country's biggest problems. The book uses the student debt crisis as Exhibit A. It throws out this massive number, $1.3 trillion back in early 2016. And the argument is that by making it so easy to get student loans, the government basically did 2 things. First, it made the price of college explode, and second, it created a whole generation of graduates who are financially tied to the state, creating what the author calls a permanent dependent class. And wow, take a look at this chart. The book uses this data to really hammer home its point. The argument is that government stepping in, especially with all the student loans, has made tuition costs just go through the roof. I mean, according to these numbers, since 1978, college tuition has shot up over 1,200%. That's way more than even medical care. So the author's conclusion is pretty clear. This isn't the market failing. This is the government distorting the market. And to back up this argument against big government, the author points to what he sees as just wasteful federal spending. The book gives these specific examples to try and show that when the government spends your tax money, it's totally disconnected from the value of a hard-earned dollar. And that, the argument goes, leads to projects that sound, well, pretty out there.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis of the problem. But what's the cure? Well, the proposed solution is all about getting back to the principles that the author says are needed to build Julio's world. At the very heart of that cure is this idea the author calls first principles. So what are those? The book defines them as the original ideas from the founders, baked into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And the argument is that these ideas were put there on purpose to limit the power of the government. So the whole plan hinges on bringing back that framework to boost individual and economic freedom. So to get more specific, the book really zooms in on healthcare as a prime example. Instead of the Affordable Care Act, it lays out a few key market-based reforms. Step 1, let insurance companies sell policies across state lines to create a national market. Step 2, change how insurance pays hospitals to make prices more transparent. Then expand tax-free medical savings accounts. And finally, use tax credits, not subsidies, to help low-income families with their premiums. And this quote from economist Milton Friedman, it's absolutely central to the book's entire philosophy. The author uses it to argue that you just can't separate these two things. The whole case for free markets and limited government is really built on this one core belief. If you start restricting economic freedom, you'll eventually lose your political freedom too. Okay, which brings us to our final section, the path forward. I mean, it's one thing to have a vision, but how do you actually make it a reality? Well, the strategy laid out in the book focuses like a laser on one specific group of people. And that strategy really puts the author's own organization, Turning Point USA, right at the center of the action. The book traces its journey, from a tiny startup in 2012 to this multi-million-dollar operation active on over 1,000 college campuses by 2016. And this fast growth is held up as proof that, hey, this strategy is actually working. And that's the absolute core of the whole strategy. The book argues that real lasting change doesn't happen in just one election cycle. No, it happens when you win over the hearts and minds of the next generation. It's all about mobilizing young people, calling them the foot soldiers of this movement who will be the ones to carry the message into the future. And so, we end up right back where the book leaves its readers, with a choice to make. It frames this whole thing not just as some squabble over policy details, but as a really fundamental decision about what principles should guide the country's future. At the end of the day, it all boils down to this one big question: a path supported by government or one driven by the market? A world for Julia or a world for Julio?